It's pushed. We are live.
Live, excellent. So I better stop being rude about people.
And you've got your Mr. Grumpy mug with you as well.
As a present from the kids. I have to be careful to hold it in my left hand,
so people can see it.
Well, if I hold it in my right hand, it looks vaguely rude because that's the back of his cap. So I have to make sure that people see the front. It's a Mr. Grumpy mug.
It's a Mr. Grumpy mug. I love that. Anyway, welcome to our live broadcast where Simon and I get together to talk about all things presenting. And this is the fifth in our series. And next week we are doing something slightly different. I will have another guest because we have another theme for our series, and we'll be talking about personal branding for introverted personalities, and I've got a few different people to come in and talk about that. So that is interesting because Simon and I actually had a debate because Simon does not believe that I am about 40% introverted, sometimes 50% introverted.
You're only introverted when you're asleep, Charlie. Honestly, that's cheating.
No, it is true. But I think most people don't see the introverted side of me because I hide.
Most of the really good speakers I've known and worked with, and most of the really good dance performers that I've worked with and stuff, they've been introverts because they have this advantage. This is nothing to do with today's topic, but they have this advantage of the topic being the be-all and end-all, whereas a lot of the extroverts I work with, the audience is the be-all and end-all. And that's a spectacular difference. So if an introvert is saying something unpopular, they don't care because it's the truth, whatever. Extroverts sometimes get hung up on the fact that the audience doesn't like them, and they respond quite negatively to that. They start going into themselves. That's nothing to do with today's topic, though. Should we move on?
Let's move on. So today's topic is all about how to pitch on a deadline, or pitch on the fly, or pitch without preparation. That's the title that the range of titles that I'd come up with when we talked about this. Which is weird though, because my view on pitching on the fly is that every single individual in business, no matter what your role, you should always have a one-liner at your disposal to use at any point. So every time somebody asks you what you do, you should always have something saved up that you know that you can confidently deliver. And also you should train up your team, so even the non-client facing members of your team know what this one-liner is, so that they can talk and still be able to talk about your business in a positive way when they're asked down the pub, or they're asked in random situations that you don't expect. What are your views, Simon?
I would go with that. I've never given a presentation that I've not prepared for, ever in my life. I've given presentations where people didn't think I was prepared for it because they'd asked me just a couple of minutes earlier. But the analogy I want to draw, it's a bit like being a jazz musician whose entire life is about improvisation. You get on stage and they don't know what they're going to play. That's tosh. They might not know what order they're going to play the notes, but they do know what notes they're going to play. And they might not know what melody it's going to be, but they do know the chord sequence. It's going to go 4, 5, 1, whatever the chord sequence is that they choose to use. So the improvisation that you actually do when it comes to the presentation is it's not cold presentation. There's always something that you know here and something that you know there, and what you have to do is just get the linking bits going on. So, for example, a lot of my presentations are fairly modular. And I don't know what my topic might be, but I do know this, and I do know this, and I do know this, and I do know this. So the only improv when it comes to making a presentation is what order do I put those little bits in. So there's no secret other than to be prepared for when you can't be prepared, if you see what I mean. I know it's easier said than done, isn't it? It's easier said than done. But I mean, sometimes you do get genuinely ambushed, but far less often than people would think. And there's a whole bunch of interesting research about this stuff about you never get a second chance to make a first impression, and all of that kind of trite stuff. Kind of true. So there's a fundamental question you have to ask yourself. If you've got to suddenly make a pitch and you're not ready for it, if you're genuinely not ready for it, you need to do a quick bit of poker thinking and go, do I want to risk it? Because if I risk it and blow it, there's a question of whether that is worse or better than not risking it at all. So if you know that by not doing it, you're going to get another chance in a month or 2 months when you are ready, there's a question of whether you should pitch cold or whether you should back away. But that's a decision that I can't make for you, because it depends upon whether you're going to get that second chance, how well you think you're going to pitch, and all of that kind of jazz. But walking away is a perfectly acceptable possibility. I don't recommend it, but it's a perfectly good possibility. I could have walked away from these. I said, let's make a presentation about making pitches when you don't know what you're talking about. The sensible thing for me to have done would be to go, oh hell no. I'm going to come back when I've got more time to practice it, prepare it, and all of that kind of jazz, which would have been cheating a little bit, given that I'm talking about. But I've got bits of material that I know that I can bring together. Whether I bring them together in a coherent matter is another matter, but I do know I've got material for it, because I've rehearsed those little bits of material separately and for individual things.
It's so interesting that, and everything that you're saying is so true, because I remember that we had this conversation just before I think it was about a week before I did my Speaker Factor talk with the PSA, and I think you did say, like, if you're not prepared for this, you can walk away. You can say, no, I'm not going to do it, because it was stressing me out and I hadn't prepared at the time. Just as a note, I did prepare, and Simon helped me greatly get to a point which helped me win.
So we need to add something to that.
Yeah.
You did prepare. Simon helped you greatly, and
I won.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, yeah, I won. Although, I mean, to be fair, like I think my attitude has always been just give it a try, because. And I mean, I'm saying this based on the fact that I've never had a situation where, even if I fluffed it up, it's gone, like I've damaged my reputation, because I think I've always been open and honest. If I am going to do something on the fly and it's not prepared, or if it's all over the place. I'm thinking back to a very horrible conference that I had to do in Germany, where I was due to fly over with a technical colleague to a forensics conference in Germany. And it was one of those, it was a very, very niche, very specific conference where there were people translating the talks, and everybody was listening in headphones. And it was very, if you can imagine sitting in a room full of forensic specialists, that was it.
That's hard work.
And we were demonstrating essentially a MVP technical solution alongside.
Slow down. I know what MVP is.
Minimum viable product. Essentially, it was a new concept. It hadn't been fully tested, and it was still in its infancy, but we were going and presenting this product, doing a live demonstration, and then presenting the data afterwards. And the technical colleague that was coming with me on the demo, so I was there for the commercial conversations and he was there to do the technical wizardry that he was doing. His children were sick the morning he was due to fly. So whilst I was driving to the airport, I got a phone call saying he couldn't make it, so he wasn't going to be able to come. And I was there with the equipment because I was responsible for flying the equipment to Germany. And in the end, our new software developer, who had literally been working for the company for about a month, was the only person available to come and join me. And we were literally sort of sat by the side of this river trying to make this system work whilst on the phone to the specialist back at the company. And then I had to present it to this group of people. And it was one of those that I don't think I could have walked away from that, because, obviously we'd invested quite a lot of money and scrambled around and done some stuff. But I was upfront and honest about the situation, about the challenges that we faced. But I think talking about the story and the challenges and not pretending that it was a fully polished, fully tested and tried system, it definitely helped, because actually the intention of us being there was to start getting people talking about the product and everything else. And I think I did get a few comments as well, because I was shaking so much whilst trying to deliver this talk and basically say, oh dear, like we haven't really got very much data at all. But it did generate a lot of conversations, and in one way I was sort of forgiven for the lack of preparation.
Yeah, there's some interesting research, not specifically about presentations, but about competence in other things, which suggests that people will forgive you for being technically incompetent. In fact, they may even be on your side for being technically incompetent if they buy into the reason for your technical. And here, that "if" is such a small word, but with a huge meaning. If they buy in for your reasoning for being technically incompetent. So if you say to somebody, I'm sorry, this is going to take me a little longer to do X, it is literally my first day on the job, that's one thing. But being technically incompetent because it is your first day on the job, when the audience doesn't know that, Now that's another, because at that point you just start to look like a moron.
Yep.
So as long as they have bought into why you are technically incompetent, that's okay. But the key thing, they have to buy into it. It can't be an excuse. It has to be something
genuine.
Even worse than genuine, it has to be something that they recognise as genuine.
Very good point.
Yeah. So it might be genuine to you that your colleagues' children were sick, but the audience doesn't necessarily care. They did, obviously, and you were fine. But it has to be something that the audience accepts as a good reason for being technically incompetent. But pitches aren't like that. Funding pitches aren't like that.
Oh no, definitely not.
Who is going to forgive you for going, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know my figures. I wasn't prepared to make a pitch. Well, if you don't know your freaking figures, like the back of your hand, why are you even, what are you doing there out of the office where you should be at home looking at the spreadsheets, getting the figures sorted out?
Well, it goes back onto what you were saying last week, which was around like when you're delivering, investors invest in the person as much as they invest in the company. So if you're stood up there not knowing your figures and you're the person that's running the company and leading the direction of travel, then you do come across as a bit incompetent. But you talked about an interesting point to start with, which is all around the knowing the topics and the themes, and it wasn't necessarily about improvising. It's like you put your topics that you already know, that you have prepared, and then you put them in an order around the thing. Because I'm the complete opposite. I prefer not being prepared. If I have to rehearse something, that makes me much more nervous than just getting up and talking about something that I know. But the key is that even though it's on the fly, I know what I'm talking about anyway, because I know the stories, because they're my stories and the way that I can tell them. But I listened to a podcast earlier this year, and it was an interview with Brené Brown, and she was saying that she never prepares for a talk, and she's a world-renowned public speaker. She never prepares for a talk, but what she said, though, she knows her beats, and she calls them beats.
Yeah, she's lying.
She's lying.
She's lying. When she says she doesn't prepare, what she means is she doesn't script.
Yes, very good point. So she's not lying. She's not lying. She's just using different language.
She's using the same language in a way that's completely different to how other people use it. But apart from that, yeah. But no, you're right. She doesn't have a script, and that's one of the great things about pitching and many presentations. All good presentations should contain a degree of improv anyway, because otherwise you sound like a script. The only people who can run a script and make it sound authentic are actors. It's really difficult to sound authentic when you're not being. So this idea of having some improv in your presentation is the best way of doing it. So Brené Brown's, I know my beats. I don't necessarily know the bits that goes between my beats. Spot on. Absolutely spot on.
Good.
And isn't it good to know that I approve of Brené Brown? I bet she's really pleased to know that I approve of what she said.
I'm going to go on Twitter after this. It's just like, did you know that Simon at presentations, who you know so well, approves of your public speaking?
That fabulous accent of hers. It'll take her 5 minutes to go, who ya? It'll be absolutely fabulous. But there are other things you can rehearse, which people that don't ever think about. So, for example, I've mentioned in the past this idea of something called the Oppenheimer effect, which is if you're good at something, they assume you're good at other things. If you're bad at something, they assume you're bad at other things. There's no reason why you can't rehearse and have prepared transferable things that you can. So, for example, rehearse the damned tech at some point. So that when you have to make an improv presentation, at least those things that you can control are under your control. Because there's nothing worse than somebody going, how do I plug in the VGA cable? Oh, VGA cable, how old am I? How do you plug in the HDMI cable? There is no HDMI cable on this laptop. It's, where is it? Where's the Wi-Fi? Right? But at least you can rehearse those damn things so that when you stand up to make your pitch, your presentation of any kind, at least that bit is slick. And there's no reason why you can't have the ending of your presentation prepared as well. So, stupid example, for big stage stuff, I typically sign off with a triptych.
A triptych.
Something that breaks into 3 parts.
Okay. Is this a commonly known term? Because I have never heard that before.
It's commonly known in art, where you have a painting that's in three. But it basically, my usual sign off, my default sign off is thank you for coming, thank you for staying, and thank you for staying awake. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's quite a good sign off. It's not the best sign off in the world, but it's quite a good sign off. But because I've done that in other places, I've rehearsed that, and at least that bit of my presentation is okay. So the tech is okay at the beginning, the sign off is okay at the end. So even if it goes to hell in a handcart in the middle, at least I've got some bits that are prepared and rehearsed and all of that kind of jazz.
And I do recommend going and having a look at Simon's blog, because I remember trying to write my Speaker Factor talk and going to your blog, and I think you've got two. One is how to start a presentation, and the other one is how to end a presentation. And it's kind of that benefit that I talk about in marketing quite a lot, which is if don't try to tell everybody one thing all at once. So in terms of like, right, here's how you do a presentation and go through everything, because it's quite overwhelming. Whereas if you can just address one thing like you do in your blogs, which is how to end a presentation, that's one thing that you can talk about, get really, really well, and then address the next bits. Because I think we've talked about this before, it's not always, people don't remember the entire of your talk or your presentation, but they do remember how you started it, how you finished it, and little bits in between.
And certain key bits in the middle, yeah. The bits that they remember most are the ones that mean something most to them personally.
Yeah, but I did want to ask you, because we're talking about, I'm going to use Brené Brown's beats analogy, but I guess you can talk about it into whatever works for you. But like, how would you help somebody understand what their beats are and how to prepare those in advance?
Do you want me to talk about how to prepare a presentation in a chat when we're talking about how to do presentations without preparing?
In 5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fine. The way you do that is get all the data that's going to go in your presentation and then look for the pattern in it. It's definitely a two-step process. Don't try and look for the structure first, because if you do that, your head will explode. Look for what it is that you're trying to say, and then look for the common themes that fall out of it. If no common theme falls out with what it is you're trying to say, it probably means that your material is pretty dodgy, to be honest. So it should be fairly obvious where the natural chapter breaks are in your presentation. Mm-hmm. So that's why I designed the presentation design pack the way I did, for example. You get all the material and then you rearrange it. And the way to think about it is, if instead of giving a 20-minute pitch, I give 4 5-minute presentations, how do I start and finish each of those little presentations? So I start the bit of my pitch about funding. I finish the bit about funding. I start the presentation pitch about teams. I finish that. And actually, instead of trying to improvise an entire 20 minutes, you're now only ever having to improvise 5 minutes at a time. And that is a shed load easier to do than trying to hold everything in your head. But if you've got any time to prepare at all, just get your content out of your head onto paper in front of you, and then think about the structure. Just dump everything. Just do a cathartic brain dump and get it out onto the page. If you want to use the presentation design pack, that's what's the best way of doing it. But there are other ways of doing it. There's things like, just for goodness sake, write a set of bullet points if you've got 2 minutes. Just write it while the previous speaker is doing his Q&A or something, or go to the loo and whatever. Or a spider diagram is a really good way of doing it, because it's less structured than notes, because notes you tend to write in the order in which you'll end up saying them, but a spider diagram, you can just throw them all over the page, and that makes it much easier for you to jump around the page. Or if you've got time, just bung an image onto your PowerPoint and just put any old keyword stuff into your presenter view to remind yourself what it is that you're going to be saying, so long as you've got the technical competence to operate presenter view properly, rather than put the wrong thing on the screen behind you, which I have seen in the past.
It's a good tip when doing webinars as well.
I wonder who did that recently. I can't imagine. But any preparation you can do, even if it is just that, anything is better than nothing. The downside of that is that we call it getting off the book. If once you have written it down, there is a tendency to make a presentation from because you're scared, and this is your emotional crutch. And there's one here that says just say no, FFS. And my next bullet point is about over rehearsing versus over performing. Is it possible to over rehearse something? So is there an advantage to not? Once you're on the script, it's very hard to get off. So there is an advantage to just making notes, just single word notes. And they use them as an aid memoir. So just the word over rehearse versus over perform. That actually, the bullet point there genuinely says over rehearse versus over perform. And everything else I would talk about there comes from me knowing about that. It just reminds me to talk about it.
Well, that's a good presentation tip all around, not just if you're doing it on the fly, which is in one way, I'd like to encourage more people to do presentations on the fly, to get used to talking with just an image or one bullet point behind you as a prompt, because I think as well, because I've worked in so many like technical fields in the past, I've sat through so many presentations that each slide is just crammed full of so much text and statistics and all of the information. And it's, the more engaging presentations that I've ever seen, and I think we've talked about this before, are the ones with something to guide you, something to capture your interest, or something to support what it is that you're saying. But then when your audience is actually looking at you and what it is, listening to what it is that you're saying, rather than reading what's in the background.
Absolutely.
So it's a good way to practice that.
The reason people do that is because they're frightened and they don't know what they're talking about, and they need the script and all of that kind of jazz. And just promise me that's water there, Charlie, not gin, because that's a really big glass of gin if that's there.
It's a lemon drink. I think
okay.
It's a lemon drink. Yeah, no, I'm not a gin drinker.
Okay, fine.
Scotch all the way for me.
Yeah. But one of the ways you can work on all of this with the structure that we're talking about there is just grab a flip chart or a whiteboard or something, and what we call co-create, which is you say to the person who has said, tell me about your pitch, or make a pitch, or sell to me, or whatever it is. You say to them, what is it you want to know about first? And that word first is cripplingly important, because if you just say, what do you want to know? You sound like you're on the back foot and you're making them do the work. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you say, what do you want to know about first? That makes it sound like you've got something completely prepared and you're being courteous and giving them the choice of the order in which you put things. So what you can do is, if you've got 30 seconds to prepare, is just put 5 words, if you like, on a whiteboard or a flip chart or whatever. And that reminds you of the things you've got to talk about. And then turn to the person in your audience who's the investor or whatever, and you say, which of these is most important for you to hear about first? It's a breathtakingly dirty trick. Because it means you've got the aid memoirs, you've got the stuff written down there, but you're making it look like to the audience you're doing them a favour by letting them control the order of things.
It's a really good point and a really good tip, because I think as well as an observation is that speakers are generally much more confident at answering questions from the crowd than sometimes they are in delivering their presentation or their talk. So if you're asking the crowd, what do they want to know first? You could treat it a little bit more like a Q&A. Therefore, it helps you feel more confident in talking about, the topics that you know most about.
Absolutely, you're not wrong, but you do have to give them a limited choice.
Yeah.
Guided democracy. Because if you just let the audience ask questions, then structure goes out the window.
So go on, what are your tips? So if somebody's going to ask the audience, what do they want to know first? What are your tips in terms of making that guided and limiting the options?
Oh, just put it in front of them and say, look, there are 5 things here.
Right, okay, so you present them with the options first.
Yeah, which of those? It's like your burn's smaller than mine. I've got 2 grown-up daughters, right? But I remember when they were kids, you would say things to them. I would say things to them like, do you want to tidy your bedroom before dinner or after dinner? Well, I don't care. Just as long as they tidy their bedroom, I don't care where. But it made them feel. I just hope that neither of them are watching this video. How Machiavellian the father was about getting them to bed. It makes them feel like they have some control over it. They're invested in it, and they go. They obviously always chose after dinner, but at least then I'd got the moral high ground of going, well, you promised you would do it after dinner. It's now after dinner. You've got to keep your, but it gives them the illusion of being in control. You can have, you can have any colour you want, as long as it's black. You can talk about anything you want, so long as it's on this list. You can tidy your bedroom anytime you want, so long as it's immediately after or immediately before tea. You give them the structure.
That's a really good tip in terms of polls as well. So if you're going to use polls in presentations, I suppose it's, I don't know, I'm guessing here, you may have to correct me, easier to do virtually than it is in person. But if you're going to run a poll, a lot of people go yes or no, or ask a question which is yes or no. Whereas if you could just tweak the wording to yes or maybe, or two positive outcomes of that poll, you help people think more positively and get people a little bit more round to your way of thinking, or
Yes, but.
Yes, but. Go on.
And the but is that the audience will see you doing that if you're not careful.
You've got,
so for example, there's a very, very famous poll has just come out in the States where it must be a mick take because no one's this stupid, where they've talked about how well the president of America is coping with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay.
And the options are brilliantly, I'm paraphrasing here, brilliantly, exceptionally, very well. There's no option for he's making a complete pig's ear of it. So when that gets reported on the news, they can go 35% of people think the president is doing an exceptional job of coping with COVID-19. And well, maybe, but we don't.
Well, that's a rigged poll. I'm not talking about. Yeah,
exactly. Now I'm using that as a cartoonesque example, but people will spot if you start to play with the questions. But there are some really interesting bits of research about this. My favorite from way back in the day when I was a research scientist was if you change the way a question is answered, you get a shed load of different answers. So for example, there's a famous one where you go, you ask men, do you or have you ever beaten your wife? Your eyebrows are going up there. It's a dangerous question to ask, isn't it?
Let's go down a rabbit hole here.
Well, yeah. 4% of people who answered the question said, yes, I have, or I do, or I have. But if you ask the same question and you phrase it differently and you go, when was the last time you beat your wife? Options, never, less than 6 months. Now 14% of people say they have or do beat their wives because it's normalized in the answers. The never option is still there, which is the same as no, but now it's just it's part of a continuum rather than, so you can tweak answers spectacularly, but for heaven's sake, be careful in case people spot you doing it.
But also do it with a genuine. I actually had somebody call me out on LinkedIn because I ran a poll which is all around how, like, if you could choose one way in which you get the biggest benefit from using LinkedIn, what would it be? And obviously, like, LinkedIn only give me 4 poll options, and there are so many different ways that you can use LinkedIn. So I kind of chose the 4 that most people come to me and talk about, and I work with a lot of people on. But I did say, right, okay, I know that there are only 4 options here, so add it in the comments if there are other options for you. And then there was some keyboard warrior that was all there on the comments basically accusing me of fraud and trying to rig it because it was a biased question, which the intention was not there, and it was quite clear because he was the only person that was asking it. But I guess from what you're saying, there are a lot of people that do it unintentionally, so it's just a case of being careful, but also do it with a genuine interest. And that's, I think, where 80% of statistics are made up in the first place kind of come from. Because it's like I've seen huge big name B2C brands in their advertising quote statistics, and they've now legally got to put how big an audience it was. And the audience is quite small, and it's like, if you have a look at the actual population, how reliable is that data?
It's not at all. 83% of women who used this hair colour said it was a great idea, and you go, how many women did you ask? 4.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But there's a lot of tech will help with this, and it's heading away from the doing it on the fly stuff. But there's a bit of software I use called Poll Everywhere, which allows you to get immediate feedback from audiences that you can include in your presentation. It's easiest to do it if you've got prep, but it can be done on the fly if you've got a little bit of keyboard skills and that kind of jazz. And the feedback from those questions gets slots right into a slide, so you can ask a question, talk for a couple of minutes, And then slide 3 will show the audience responses to the question that you put in the beginning, which again makes the audience feel like it's an interactive thing that they're part of. But once you've got the interaction going, you're making it up on the spur of the moment. Interaction is the default way of doing it. Put your hands up if, how many of you, or which of these would you like me to talk about first, and all of that kind of jazz. You can get really into the interactive thing. The hard part is remembering somehow to keep structure and to keep control with you rather than with the audience. Because I have seen a lot of presenters who should know better pitch up for meetings and go, I haven't prepared anything today because I thought it would be better for you if we just have a chat, Q&A. Ask me whatever you want to know. And at that point, it's transparently obvious to the entire audience that what they meant was, I haven't prepared anything today because I'm lazy and I want you, the audience, to do all the work for me by asking me questions. Brackets, I know you can't because you don't have enough knowledge of the topic to ask questions, because if you did, the only way to have got that would have been for me to do a presentation in the first place. Close brackets. So there's this long silence where nobody can ask any damn questions.
And it gets a bit awkward, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying you should never use questions. I am saying you shouldn't use it as a get out of jail free card to avoid doing the prep and to avoid doing the work. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now before my nose starts to bleed.
But no, it's all good points. And I think as well, like we've kind of demonstrated here too, is that when you don't prepare for a presentation, you also run the risk of going down a rabbit hole or going completely off topic, which I think we've done a couple of times.
Yeah, nicely.
Yeah. But also, like we didn't compare notes at all before this, so.
No, but there is a great way of doing, which we should have done, which is to make your presentation an interview.
Ah, yes.
So even with just 2 minutes prep, I could have just given you, here are 5 questions. You ask me those questions, I answer those questions, and you move on. So you make it more journalistic. And that has a whole bunch of advantages, because what that does is substitute you in the place of the audience. So you're asking the questions the audience wants to know. It breaks things up more interestingly for the audience, because it's not just me talking. It flips between you and me, and we look very, very different because I'm nearly 60 with grey hair, and you're not nearly 60 with grey hair. This is your option to go, you don't look nearly 60, Simon.
Yeah, you definitely don't look. No, I'm only joking. I was actually thinking, I was like, you're not nearly 60, surely. But I knew that would just be stroking your ego. So I was like, well.
That's 60 is my IQ, right? Not my but the other thing it does also is break up the flow of the presentation, so that if audiences have lost it and got bored of me pontificating as a white 60-year-old middle-aged bloke, and they fall asleep, suddenly having a different voice, a different presenter go, so if that's the case, Simon, what about such and such? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've said, that's interesting, Simon. You've told us how big the market is. How are you going to access that market? And that's the kind of thing that someone's going to know in a pitch presentation. And that's the point where they go, all right, I've got bored the last 5 minutes, but this is a new presentation. This is a new section. This is a new chapter. This is a new beginning. So if you can do the interview thing, it's an absolutely canny thing. I love
interview style things personally.
A little bit more structured is ideal, but yeah.
Than this. This is more of like a live chat about conversation.
This is more about the quality of my cup of tea mug than anything else. But I've seen people do the interview thing really brilliantly well, where the question has been on the screen behind them.
Ah, right, yeah.
So even if you've only got 5 minutes to prepare your slides, you can type really, if you can't type fast enough to type 5 questions in 5 minutes, you've got a bigger problem than the presentation. So you just put the question up there. Yeah. Even if you're a hunter pecker, you can type 5 questions. And you use that as the prompt to have a conversation. So it's almost as though the slide behind you replaces the interviewer.
Yeah.
I've also seen it done superbly well where there's actually a recording of somebody asking the question. That's too much to do on an improvised presentation, but it does work nicely if you've got all the slick tech behind you and more time to prepare.
Okay, so if anybody wants to find out more about those particular techniques, what's the best way of doing it?
Give me money.
That's definitely one way of doing it.
There's lots of stuff. I like to think there's lots of stuff on the blog. So there's a huge, great blog actually. I think that's 4,500 words. That blog you mentioned on how to start your presentation, where I talk about credibility statements and all of that kind of jazz. So the blog is a good place to start. I think the post on how to finish your presentation, where I talk about triptychs and things, I think that's only about 3,000 words. But even so, between those two things, that's 7,500 words. That's a small book.
Yeah, I was going to say, so before you go, oh God, I'm going to run away screaming, it's definitely worth looking at these things, because you generally, I think you only need to look at it once, and it gives you the tips that you can kind of take away and have a look at and then refer back to.
Hence me saying right at the beginning that even if you don't know this presentation, you do know this, and you know this, and you can bring them together in an improv way.
Yeah.
I probably should give the blog address, really, hadn't I?
I was going to say that. We will include it. We will include it in the show notes as well. I say show notes because I'm in podcasting mode at the moment. I mean the description underneath this video.
I say presentationgenius.info/blog with a complete lack of originality.
Well, there you go. But you are going to send me the exact links to the how to start a presentation and how to finish the presentation, so I can include them. Yes?
Apparently.
Yeah, awesome.
Somebody was asking us earlier on how scary you are. I've just seen that face that says you are going to do this or die. So yes, okay, I'll send you those links.
I know, I have had that. I have had this before. Like, Charlie is really scary. I'm not scary at all. Like, surely you've listened to me bang on enough to know that I'm not scary. Maybe.
What's the correct answer, Charlie?
I was waiting for you to say that. What's the correct answer? The correct answer is no, Charlie, you are not scary at all.
No, Charlie, you're not scary. You're not scary. You're not scary. Please don't hit me. You're not scary.
Definitely painting the wrong picture of me here. Anyway, right, so we have gone over time, but let's quickly summarise, because I know that you did scribble a few things on before, on your piece of paper beforehand. Let's quickly summarise. Tips for people. If you are likely to be doing presentations on the fly, what do you need to know?
Know your stuff and the area around your stuff. Prepare what you can prepare, so you've got little bits of stuff that you can bring. I should mention that helps your nerves as well. Rehearse your tech, rehearse openings, rehearse closings. Think about doing things interactively. If you do things interactively, make sure you have some way of giving the audience the interaction, but you keep control. And don't be afraid to explain why you're doing it on the fly, because if they forgive you, if they buy into your here is why I'm doing it on the fly rather than doing it, if they buy into that, they will forgive all kinds of things. Yeah, people are people. They're human beings and like inherently kind. If you attract the right people. Yes, Simon, even you. I mean, we're at time. I know we're at time, but there's a lot of stuff we can talk about. Using stories rather than data and all of that kind of jazz also helps. One parting shot: don't apologise with the I'm sorry, this is going to be rubbish. Yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that. You don't want to tell people why they want to leave the room before you've even started. Yeah. Lock the doors before you say anything like that, so they can't get out. Yeah, and I do want to recommend a book though, because it's one of I'd probably put it in my top 10 books. Is a book called a guy called Warren Berger called A More Beautiful Question, because what Simon was talking about essentially is the better, or that's an awful use of English. If you can use questions in a much more positive and clever way, you can get more out of the situation. So understanding how to ask better questions is a very valuable thing to do. And that book, I read it years ago, and it's just brilliant. So read that. And it's just not just questioning your kids if you want them to tidy their room, but just sort of questioning in business, in life, in work, and everything. It's great. I should point out that one of my daughters is now 27, and I've given up attempting to get her tidied the room. Yeah, my brother's 33, and he doesn't do that either. Right. On that note, shall we go and do something more useful for people? Yes, so if you want to contact me or Simon, again, look in the description, because I've put links to each of our websites and contact details and everything else. But also, if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, you can always add that into the comments. And then, just look out for future videos. So until next time, see you later. Take care, guys.